I still remember the night my husband walked out of our home while I was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. I remember standing by the front door, holding my stomach, begging him to tell me why the man who promised to love me forever was suddenly leaving us behind. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, but he still walked away. He left me with unanswered questions, unpaid bills, and a baby girl who would grow up wondering why her father never came back. For years, I believed my husband abandoned us because he stopped loving me. I believed he chose a different life over his own family. But 22 years later, my daughter discovered something hidden inside an old box that changed everything we thought we knew about that night. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming amazing videos, because the truth my daughter uncovered would force me to question every memory I had of the man I once called my husband. My name is Michelle Carter, and for most of my life, I believed my greatest heartbreak happened the night my husband left me. I thought that moment was the end of my happiness. I thought I had lost the man I loved, the future I imagined, and the family I had spent years dreaming about. But what I did not know at the time was that the pain I felt that night was only the beginning of a much bigger story. When I first met David, I believed I had found the person I would grow old with. He was the kind of man who made everyone around him feel important. He remembered small details about people. He would call his mother every Sunday. He volunteered at community events. To everyone who knew him, David Carter was the definition of a good man. And to me, he was my safe place. We met when I was 28 years old at a friend's birthday gathering in Atlanta, Georgia. I almost did not attend that night because I had just finished a long week at work and wanted nothing more than to stay home. But my best friend Tasha convinced me to come. She told me, "Michelle, you spend too much time taking care of everyone else. Tonight, you need to enjoy yourself." I laughed because she always knew exactly what to say. That night changed my entire life. David was standing near the back of the room, talking with a group of friends. He was not the loudest person there. He was not trying to get attention, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made me notice him. A few minutes later, he walked over and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm David," he said with a smile. I remember smiling back and saying, "I know. You're the guy everyone keeps saying is too serious." He laughed. And that laugh was the first thing I loved about him. For the next few months, David showed me a side of love I had never experienced before. He would leave handwritten notes for me. He would surprise me after work with my favorite meal. He made plans for the future and talked about the family we would one day build. When he proposed 2 years later, I did not hesitate. I said yes because I believed I was saying yes to forever. I never imagined that one day I would stand at our front door, pregnant with our child, watching the same man walk away from everything we created. I used to believe that the hardest moment in a person's life was losing someone they loved. I thought heartbreak was something that happened suddenly, like a door closing forever. But I later learned that some heartbreaks do not happen in a single moment. Some begin quietly, through small changes you notice but choose to ignore, because accepting the truth feels too painful. My name is Michelle Carter, and for 22 years, I carried a question inside my heart that I could never answer. Why did my husband leave me when I needed him the most? Why did David Carter walk away from our home when I was carrying our child? And why did he disappear so completely that my daughter grew up knowing her father only through the memories I tried to give her? For years, I believed David abandoned us because he stopped loving me. I believed he chose another life over the family we were supposed to build together. I believed the man who once held my hand and promised me forever simply decided that we were no longer worth fighting for. But I was wrong. The truth was hidden behind years of silence, unanswered questions, and a secret that my daughter Amaya would eventually uncover. A secret that would force me to look back at the night my life changed forever. The night my husband walked away. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming amazing videos. Because this is not just the story of a marriage that ended. This is the story of a mother who had to rebuild her life, a daughter who searched for answers, and a truth that waited years before finally coming to light. When I first met David Carter, I was not searching for someone to complete me. I had already built a life I was proud of. I worked hard, took care of myself, and believed that if love came into my life, it should add happiness rather than become the foundation of my entire existence. But then David appeared. At the time, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. I had a small apartment, a steady job, and a circle of friends who had become like family. Life was not perfect, but I was grateful. I had learned that happiness was not about having everything you wanted. It was about appreciating what you already had. I met David at a birthday celebration for one of my closest friends. I almost did not go that evening. I had spent the entire week working and was exhausted. All I wanted was to go home, take off my shoes, and enjoy a quiet night alone. But my friend Tasha refused to let me stay home. "Michelle, you always say you're tired," she told me. "One day you're going to wake up and realize you missed all the moments you were supposed to enjoy." I laughed because she always had a way of making me feel guilty in the nicest way possible. So I went. And that decision changed my entire future. David was not the type of man who tried to be the center of attention. He was calm, observant, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. I remember seeing him across the room, laughing with a few friends. There was something different about him. He seemed comfortable with himself. He was not trying to impress anyone. Later that evening, he walked over and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm David," he said. I smiled and replied, "I know. I've heard people talking about you." He looked surprised. "Hopefully good things." I laughed. "They said you're the serious one in the group." He smiled and said, "Maybe I just haven't found the right people to be silly around." That small conversation became the beginning of something I never expected. Over the next few months, David showed me a side of himself that made me believe I had found someone special. He remembered the little things. He remembered how I liked my coffee. He remembered the stories I told him. He remembered important dates that even I sometimes forgot. And most importantly, he made me feel seen. There is something powerful about feeling like someone truly understands you. When you find a person who notices your struggles, celebrates your victories, and stands beside you during difficult moments, it becomes easy to believe that person will always be there. That was how I felt about David. I did not just fall in love with him, I trusted him. And that trust became the reason his disappearance hurt so deeply. After 2 years together, David asked me to marry him. I still remember that day clearly. It was not some extravagant event with cameras and hundreds of people watching. It was simple. It was personal. It felt like us. He told me he wanted to build a life with me. He told me he wanted a home filled with laughter. He told me he wanted children who would grow up knowing they were loved. Those words stayed with me. Because years later, when I was sitting alone with a newborn baby in my arms, those same promises were the memories that hurt the most. Our wedding day was one of the happiest days of my life. I remember looking around and seeing the people who supported us. My family. My friends. Everyone who believed we were beginning something beautiful. And I believed it too. David was the kind of husband people admired. He helped around the house. He checked on me when I was stressed. He made plans for our future. When we moved into our first home together, we celebrated every little achievement. Our first couch, our first family dinner, the first picture we hung on the wall. They were ordinary moments, but they meant everything to me, because I thought those moments were the beginning of forever. I never imagined they would one day become memories I would struggle to look at. For the first few years of our marriage, I truly believed David and I had built something strong enough to survive anything. We were not a perfect couple. We had disagreements like everyone else. We had moments where we misunderstood each other. We had stressful days when money was tight and responsibilities felt overwhelming. But I never believed those things could destroy what we had. Because every time life became difficult, David always told me the same thing. "We're a team, Michelle." Those words became something I held on to. A team. That was what I believed we were. When David got a promotion at work, I celebrated with him. When he had difficult days, I listened to him. When he felt uncertain about the future, I reminded him that we would figure things out together. I believed marriage was about standing beside someone even when life was not easy. And I thought David believed the same thing. The biggest dream we shared was becoming parents. We talked about children long before I became pregnant. We imagined what they would look like. We imagined their personalities. We imagined family vacations, birthdays, and the little moments that people often take for granted. David always said he wanted a daughter. He would joke that he hoped she would have my smile because he knew he would never be able to say no to her. I laughed every time he said it. I remember telling him, "You're going to spoil her," and he smiled. "I probably will." Those conversations became some of my most painful memories later because they reminded me of the man David used to be. The man who was excited about becoming a father. The man who once held my stomach and promised our baby would have everything she needed. When I found out I was pregnant, I was overwhelmed with happiness. I remember sitting in the bathroom holding the pregnancy test, staring at those 2 lines and feeling like my entire life had changed in the best possible way. I cried, not because I was afraid, because I was happy. I walked into the living room where David was sitting, and I could barely get the words out. "We're having a baby." For a moment, he just looked at me. Then his face changed. The serious expression disappeared, and he smiled in a way I had not seen in a long time. He stood up, walked toward me, and hugged me. "We're really having a baby?" I nodded. That night, we stayed awake talking about everything. Names, schools, the kind of parents we wanted to become. We had no idea that the same child we were celebrating would eventually become the person who uncovered the truth we spent years searching for. The first few months of my pregnancy were beautiful. David came to appointments with me. He listened when the doctor explained everything. He helped prepare the nursery. He read parenting books and acted like he was already practicing for fatherhood. People around us noticed how excited he was. My mother used to tell me, "Michelle, you found a good man." And I believed her. I believed everyone who saw the same person I saw. But slowly, little things began to change. At first, they were so small that I convinced myself I was imagining them. David started spending more time on his phone. He became protective of his privacy in a way he never had before. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he would quickly put the phone away. When I asked who he was talking to, he would casually say, "Just work." I wanted to believe him. I had no reason not to. Trust was the foundation of our marriage. But something inside me started feeling unsettled. There was a distance between us that I could not explain. One evening, I cooked dinner and waited for him to come home. The food became cold before he finally walked through the door. Normally, I would have complained jokingly, "David, you know dinner doesn't wait forever." But that night, I noticed something different. He looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. Like his mind was somewhere else. I asked him if everything was okay. He said, "Yeah, I'm just dealing with a lot." I wanted to help him. That was who I was. When I loved someone, I wanted to carry their burdens with them. So I reached for his hand. But he pulled away. It was only for a second. A small movement. Something most people would never notice. But I noticed. And that moment stayed with me. Because it was the first time I felt like my husband was slowly becoming a stranger. As my pregnancy continued, the changes became harder to ignore. David started missing appointments. The same man who once rearranged his schedule to be there suddenly had reasons why he couldn't make it. A meeting. A work emergency. Something unexpected. Every time, I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself that becoming a father was a huge responsibility, and maybe he was scared. I wanted to protect our marriage. I wanted to protect my baby. I wanted to believe that whatever was happening was temporary. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, while folding baby clothes in the nursery, I found myself staring at the empty crib. I remember placing my hand on my stomach and whispering to my unborn child, "Everything is going to be okay." I said those words because I needed to believe them, not because I was certain. Then came the night that changed my life forever. It was a quiet evening, too quiet. David came home later than usual. I remember looking at him when he entered the house. There was something in his face that immediately frightened me. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was something I could not understand. He looked like someone who had already made a decision. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer immediately. He walked into the bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a bag being moved. My heart started racing. I slowly walked toward the room, and that was when I saw it. David was packing. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. I stood there, 8 months pregnant, watching my husband place clothes into a bag. The same man who promised me forever was preparing to leave. "David, what are you doing?" He stopped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me and said words that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I need some time away. I remember feeling like the air had disappeared from the room. Time away? From me? From our baby? From the family we were about to become? I asked him why. I asked him what happened. I asked him if there was someone else. But David only looked down. And that silence hurt more than any answer could have. I stood there in the doorway, trying to understand what was happening in front of me. The man I had shared my dreams with was packing a bag. The man who spent months talking about the daughter we were about to welcome into the world was now preparing to walk away from us. I kept waiting for him to tell me this was a misunderstanding. I kept waiting for him to smile and say he was joking. I kept waiting for him to say, "Michelle, I would never leave you." But those words never came. Instead, David Carter stood there quietly, avoiding my eyes. And that silence became the answer I never wanted to hear. "David, please talk to me," I said. My voice was shaking, not because I wanted to beg him to stay, but because I needed to understand how we got there. How did a marriage that once felt so strong reach a moment where my husband was standing in front of me with a bag in his hand? I asked him if I had done something wrong. I asked him if he was unhappy. I asked him if there was another woman. Every question came from a place of fear and confusion. But David gave me very little. He simply said, "It's complicated." Those words have stayed with me for years. Because when someone tells you something is complicated, it often means there are parts of the story they are not ready to share. I looked at my husband, the father of my unborn child, and I realized there was a part of his life I no longer understood. A part he had kept away from me. That night, I learned something painful about love. Sometimes the person standing closest to you can still have secrets you know nothing about. I had spent years believing I knew David completely. I knew his favorite foods. I knew the stories from his childhood. I knew the dreams he shared with me. But standing there in that bedroom, I realized there were things inside his heart that he had never allowed me to see. I remember placing my hand over my stomach. Our daughter moved slightly, and for a moment, my pain became mixed with fear. I was not only thinking about myself anymore, I was thinking about the baby who would soon arrive. A baby who deserved two parents. A baby who deserved a father who would be there. "David, what about our daughter?" I asked. That question made him pause. For the first time that night, I saw emotion in his eyes. Pain, regret, something I could not explain. But instead of staying, he looked away. I need to figure some things out. I wanted to ask him what things. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to tell him that families were not something you walked away from when life became difficult. But I was exhausted. Emotionally, physically. I was 8 months pregnant, standing in my own home, trying to convince the person who promised to protect me that he should not leave. And that was a moment I never imagined experiencing. When David finally walked toward the front door, I followed behind him. I still remember every detail. The sound of his footsteps. The way the house felt unusually quiet. The way I held onto my stomach because I felt like I was losing control of everything around me. He reached for the door handle, and I said the only thing I could think of. "Are you really leaving?" David stopped. For a few seconds, he did not move. I thought maybe that was the moment he would turn around. Maybe he would realize what he was doing. Maybe he would choose us. But he opened the door, and he left. I watched the man I loved disappear into the night. I watched the car lights fade away, and I stood there wondering how the future I dreamed about could change in a single evening. That was the last time I saw my husband as my husband. The days after David left felt unreal. I would wake up every morning and for a few seconds I would forget. I would reach for my phone expecting a message from him. I would listen for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. I would think about calling him. But then reality would return. David was gone. The person who promised to stand beside me through everything had left me during the moment when I needed him most. My family wanted me to be angry. My mother told me I had every right to feel betrayed, and she was right. But anger was not the only emotion I felt. I missed him. That was the part nobody understood. People think when someone hurts you, the love disappears immediately, but it doesn't. My heart was broken, but I still loved the man who broke it. I still remembered the good years. I still remembered the way he held my hand when we found out we were having a baby. I still remembered the promises, and that made everything harder. A few weeks later, my daughter was born. The day I held Amaya for the first time was the day I understood something important. Even though David had left, my life was not over. My daughter looked at me with those tiny eyes, and I knew I had a reason to keep going. I named her Amaya Carter because she was still part of the family I once dreamed about. She was still a piece of the love David and I once shared. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I cried. Not because I was sad, because I realized I was stronger than I thought. I had spent weeks wondering how I would survive without David, but holding Amaya showed me that I already had something more powerful than my pain. I had purpose. The hardest part was going home, because when I brought Amaya into the house, everything reminded me of David. The nursery we prepared together, the baby clothes he helped choose, the small details we planned for our daughter. Every corner carried memories. But now, I was the only one there. I was the one waking up during the night. I was the one learning how to calm a crying baby. I was the one attending doctor appointments alone. And every time someone asked, "Where is Amaya's father?" I had to find a way to answer without breaking down. I never wanted my daughter to grow up believing she was abandoned. Because she wasn't. She was loved. She was deeply loved. But I also knew that one day, she would ask the question every child eventually asks. Why did my father leave? And I did not know how I would answer. Because the truth was, I still did not know. The first year without David was the year that taught me the meaning of strength. Before he left, I thought strength meant being able to handle difficult situations without breaking down. I thought strong people were the ones who always had answers, the ones who never cried, the ones who knew exactly what to do when life changed. But becoming a single mother taught me something different. Sometimes strength means waking up every morning even when your heart is still hurting. Sometimes strength means smiling for your child when you spent the night crying. Sometimes strength means carrying a responsibility you never expected to carry. That was my reality after David left. I was no longer just Michelle Carter, a wife with dreams of building a family with her husband. I was Michelle Carter, a mother who had to become everything my daughter needed. I had to be her comfort. I had to be her protection. I had to be the person who showed her that even when life disappoints you, you can still move forward. But what made everything harder was the silence. David did not just leave our home. He disappeared from our lives. At first, I thought he needed time. I believed he would eventually call. I believed he would come back after he had cleared his mind. I believed that maybe one morning I would wake up and see a message from him saying he was ready to talk. But the days turned into weeks. The weeks turned into months. And David remained gone. When Amaya was a few months old, I started noticing how much she looked like him. It was strange because every time I looked at her, I saw both the greatest happiness of my life and the person who had caused my deepest pain. She had his eyes, his serious expression when she was thinking, the same little habit of holding onto my finger when she slept. Sometimes I would sit there watching her and wonder if David knew what he was missing. Did he know how beautiful his daughter was? Did he know the first time she smiled? Did he know the first time she laughed? Did he know the first time she called me mommy? Those moments were happening without him, and that was something I could never understand. How could someone walk away from their own child? That question stayed with me for years. I tried to keep David's absence from becoming the center of Amaya's life. I did not want her childhood to be defined by someone who was not there. So I focused on creating a home filled with love. We created our own traditions. Every Sunday morning, we made breakfast together. Every birthday, I made sure she felt special. Every holiday, I reminded her that family was not only about who shared your blood. Family was about who showed up. And I showed up. Every single day. There were moments when things were difficult. There were nights when I worried about money. There were days when I felt exhausted and wondered if I was doing enough. But then Amaya would run toward me with a smile, and somehow I found the strength to continue. She became my reason. As Amaya grew older, she started noticing that other children had fathers who came to school events. She started noticing that other families looked different from ours. And eventually, the questions began. The first time she asked about David, she was 6 years old. We were sitting in the living room looking through old family pictures. She pointed at a photo of David and me from our wedding day. "Mommy, who is that?" I felt my heart stop for a second. Because even though I knew that question would come one day, I was not prepared for it. I looked at the picture, then I looked at my daughter. "That's your father," I said. She studied the picture carefully. "Where is he?" That question was simple, but the answer was complicated. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to tell her about the night he left. I wanted to tell her about the pain. I wanted to tell her about the questions I still carried. But she was a child, and children should not have to carry the weight of adult decisions. So I chose my words carefully. I said, "Your father loved you. Sometimes people make choices we don't understand." Amaya looked confused. "Will he come back?" That question hurt more than anything, because I honestly did not know. I had no answer. So I hugged her and told her the one thing I knew was true. "You are loved," and I meant it. Years passed. Amaya grew into a bright, kind, and determined young girl. She inherited my strength, but she also inherited David's curiosity. She was the type of child who wanted to understand everything. She asked questions about the world. She questioned things that did not make sense. And even though I did not know it at the time, that curiosity would eventually lead her to the truth about her father. A truth I had spent years trying to accept. When Amaya was 12 years old, something happened that I still remember clearly. She came home from school after a lesson about family history. Her teacher had asked the students to create a project about their parents and where they came from. That evening, she sat beside me at the kitchen table. "Mom, I need to ask you something." I looked at her. "What is it?" She hesitated. Then she asked, "Why don't I know anything about my dad?" My heart sank. Because this time, it was not the question of a little girl. This was the question of someone beginning to understand that there were missing pieces in her own story. I took a deep breath. I told her what I had always told her, that David was her father, that he had been part of my life, that something happened between us. But I also told her something I had never said before. "I don't know the whole reason he left." Amaya looked surprised. "You don't know?" I shook my head. "No. Your father left, and he never explained everything." That was the first time I saw something change in her expression. It was not anger, it was determination. Like she had just made a decision. And years later, I would realize that moment was the beginning of the search that would uncover the truth. After that conversation with Amaya, I realized something I had been trying to avoid for years. One day, my daughter was going to search for answers, and when that day came, I would have to decide whether I was going to continue protecting her from the past or finally help her understand it. For a long time, I thought keeping quiet was the right thing to do. I believed silence was protection. I believed that if I avoided speaking about David, I could prevent Amaya from feeling rejected. I thought that by focusing on the love she had, she would not feel the pain of the person who was missing. But I slowly began to understand that unanswered questions do not disappear, they wait. And sometimes, the things we hide because we are trying to protect someone become the very things they need to understand. As Amaya grew older, she became more curious about the man she never knew. She would ask about small things. What kind of music did Dad like? What was he like when he was younger? Did he know what I looked like when I was born? Those questions were difficult because every answer reminded me of a life that no longer existed. I could tell her about David before he left. I could tell her that he laughed loudly when something was funny. I could tell her that he loved family gatherings. I could tell her that before everything changed, he was excited about becoming a father. But there was one thing I could never explain: why he walked away. That was the missing piece. And it was the piece that bothered Amaya the most. When Amaya turned 16, she became more independent. She was intelligent, focused, and determined. Teachers often told me she had a natural ability to investigate things. If something interested her, she wanted to understand every detail. At the time, I found that personality trait admirable. Later, I realized it was the reason she was able to uncover the truth. One evening, I found her sitting at the dining table with old documents spread around her. At first, I thought she was working on a school project. Then I noticed the papers. They were old, very old. I recognized them immediately. They were things I had kept from the early years of my marriage. Our wedding invitation, old photographs, letters, documents from when David and I first bought our home. I stood there quietly for a moment. "Amaya, what are you doing?" She looked up. For a second, she looked nervous. Then she answered honestly, "I'm trying to learn more about Dad." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was angry, because I knew this day would come. I walked over and sat beside her. Amaya. She looked at me. Mom, I'm not trying to hurt you. I know. I just feel like there is a part of my life missing. I looked down at the papers, and I understood. She was not searching because she hated David. She was searching because she wanted to know where she came from. Every child wants to understand their story. And Amaya's story had a missing chapter. I decided that night to tell her more than I ever had before. I told her about the man David used to be. I told her about how we met. I told her about our wedding. I told her how excited he was when we found out we were having a baby. Amaya listened carefully. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. If he loved us so much, why did he leave? I looked at my daughter, and for the first time, I admitted something I had been afraid to say. I don't know. She was quiet. You really don't know? I shook my head. No. I spent years trying to understand it. That answer seemed to affect her differently, because until that moment, I think Amaya believed I knew the truth and was choosing not to tell her. But now she understood something important. I was searching too. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. There was no return address, no explanation, just my name written on the front. I almost threw it away because I thought it was some advertisement, but something made me open it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and the moment I read the first sentence, my entire body froze, because it was about David. The letter mentioned a name I had never heard before. Elena Parker. I read the letter again, then again, trying to understand what I was seeing. Who was Elena Parker? And why was someone connecting her name to my husband after all these years? The letter did not explain everything. It only gave enough information to create more questions. It mentioned that David had been dealing with something before he left, something he never told me, something connected to the life he had before our marriage. For 22 years, I believed David walked away because he wanted to. But that letter planted a new possibility in my mind. What if there was more to the story? What if the night David left was not as simple as I believed? I did not tell Amaya about the letter immediately. I kept it hidden in my bedroom drawer. Not because I wanted to keep secrets from her, because I was afraid. Afraid that opening the past would bring pain we were not prepared to face. Afraid that whatever we discovered would change the way Amaya saw her father forever. But deep down, I knew something else. I knew that after all these years, the truth was finally trying to find its way back to us. And this time, I could not ignore it. Michelle stared at the letter for what felt like hours. The handwriting was unmistakable. She had seen those words before. The same handwriting that once filled birthday cards. The same handwriting that wrote promises about forever. The same handwriting that once written, "I will always protect you and our family." But now those same hands had written something that made her entire body feel cold. A name. Elena Parker. Michelle whispered the name softly. Who are you? For 20 years, she had convinced herself that David leaving was simple. She told herself he was selfish. She told herself he got scared. She told herself he abandoned them because he didn't want responsibility. But this letter suggested something else. Something much bigger. Something David had hidden from her. The letter was dated 3 months before David disappeared. 3 months. That was the part that disturbed Michelle the most. Because during those 3 months, David had acted like everything was normal. He kissed her before work. He held her when she felt uncomfortable during pregnancy. He told her they would be a happy family. But behind her back, David was writing to another woman. Michelle's hands shook as she continued reading. The letter did not say, "I love you." It did not sound romantic. Instead, it sounded like a warning. Elena, I need you to understand. Michelle cannot know the truth yet. If she finds out, everything will fall apart. Michelle stopped breathing for a moment. Everything will fall apart? She looked toward the old wedding picture on her nightstand. The woman smiling beside David in that photograph was a woman who believed she knew her husband. But maybe she never did. Amaya had never seen her mother cry like that. Not even when David left. Michelle had always been strong. She worked 2 jobs. She attended school events alone. She celebrated birthdays alone. She became both mother and father. Amaya grew up believing her mother had already healed from the pain. But standing outside that bedroom door, she realized something. Her mother never healed. She simply learned how to hide the wound. Mom? Michelle quickly wiped her tears. She folded the letter and placed it beneath the pillow. Amaya, what are you doing awake? I heard you crying. Silence filled the room. Amaya looked at the photographs scattered across the bed. Then she saw the old letter. Is this about Dad? Michelle looked away. That reaction told Amaya everything. Because after years of avoiding the subject, her mother finally looked afraid. The next morning, Michelle knew she could no longer protect Amaya from the truth. She placed the letter on the table. Amaya stared at it. Who is Elena Parker? Michelle looked down. I don't know. But Dad wrote to her. I know. And you never knew? Michelle swallowed. No. Amaya leaned back. For the first time in her life, she saw her mother as someone who had been hurt. Not just as her mother, but as a woman who had lost the person she trusted most. Mom, what if Dad didn't leave because he wanted to? Michelle looked at her daughter. That question scared her. Because deep inside, she had wondered the same thing for 20 years. And if David didn't leave willingly, then where was he? And why did he never come back? For 20 years, Michelle Carter had carried one painful question in her heart. Why did David leave? Every anniversary of his disappearance, she found herself asking the same thing. Was he tired of their marriage? Did he regret becoming a father? Did he meet someone else? Or was there something she never knew? For years, Michelle chose the explanation that hurt the least. She told herself David was simply a man who ran away from responsibility. It was easier to hate him than to wonder if something worse had happened. Because if David had left by choice, then at least she had an answer. But this letter changed everything. Now Michelle was facing a possibility she had buried long ago. Maybe David had not walked away from his family. Maybe someone had forced him to disappear. And the name written on that old piece of paper was the first clue. Elena Parker. Amaya sat quietly across from her mother at the kitchen table. The same table where Michelle had helped her with homework. The same table where she had packed lunches before school. The same table where she had celebrated birthdays without David. But today felt different. Today, the empty chair across from Michelle did not just represent an absent father. It represented a mystery. Mom? Amaya said softly. Michelle looked up. Tell me everything. Michelle looked at the letter. For a moment, she wanted to hide it again. She wanted to protect her daughter from the pain. That was what she had always done. When Amaya was young and asked why other children had fathers at school events, Michelle smiled and said, Your father is just somewhere far away. When Amaya asked if David loved her, Michelle forced herself to say, Of course he does. Even though she wasn't sure. Even though every night she cried alone, wondering why the man she loved never came back. But Amaya was no longer a child. She deserved the truth. I found this inside an old box, Michelle finally said. A box that belonged to your father. Amaya touched the envelope carefully. Why would Dad write another woman? Michelle shook her head. I don't know. Did you know about Elena? No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Amaya noticed. Because her mother was usually calm. But this time, there was fear in her eyes. Amaya picked up one of the old photographs. It showed her mother and father on their wedding day. Michelle was smiling. David was standing beside her with his arm around her waist. They looked happy, Amaya whispered. Michelle nodded. They were. Then what happened? Michelle looked toward the window. I don't know. And that was the truth. Because the last months of her marriage had always felt strange. At first, she thought David was stressed because of work. He became quieter. He started receiving phone calls and leaving the room. He began locking his phone. But whenever she asked if something was wrong, he always smiled. Nothing is wrong, Michelle. Those were his favorite words. Nothing is wrong. Until one night, everything changed. It was 2 weeks before David disappeared. Michelle remembered the night clearly. She had been sitting on their bed folding baby clothes. She was preparing for Amaya's arrival. David walked into the room looking worried. Not angry, not tired, afraid. She remembered looking at him and asking, David, what happened? He stared at her for several seconds. Then he smiled. But it was not a real smile. It was the kind of smile people make when they are hiding pain. Michelle, no matter what happens, I need you to promise me something. She laughed nervously. What are you talking about? Promise me you will protect our baby. She remembered feeling confused. Of course I will. But why are you saying this? David did not answer. That night, he held her longer than usual, almost like he knew it would be the last time. Back in the present, Amaya looked at her mother. Mom, you remember something? Michelle stayed silent. Because she did. She remembered everything. The strange phone calls, the fear in David's eyes, the way he kept looking over his shoulder. The night before he disappeared, he left the house saying he needed to fix something. He never came back. The police investigated. His workplace was questioned. Friends were contacted. But there was no evidence. No explanation. No goodbye. Just an empty space where David Carter used to be. Until now. Until Elena Parker. Amaya opened the letter again. There is something else. Michelle froze. What? Amaya pointed at the bottom of the page. There is an address. Michelle slowly reached for the letter. Her heart began racing. Because after 20 years of unanswered questions, they finally had somewhere to start. A place connected to David. A place connected to Elena. And possibly, a place that held the truth about why David Carter disappeared. The address on the letter sat between them like a doorway to the past. Neither Michelle nor Amaya spoke for several minutes. It was just a small piece of paper. A few handwritten words. A location. But to them, it represented something much bigger. It represented 20 years of unanswered questions. 20 years of wondering. 20 years of pain. Michelle slowly folded the letter. We should forget about this. Amaya looked at her mother in disbelief. Forget? Michelle avoided her eyes. Amaya, some doors are better left closed. But this door has been open my whole life. The words hit Michelle harder than Amaya expected. Because they were true. Amaya had grown up with a missing piece of herself. Every child wants to know where they come from. Every child wants to understand the people who created them. And for Amaya, half of her story had always been missing. Her father was not just absent. He was a mystery. Michelle stood up from the table and walked toward the kitchen counter. She held onto it tightly. I spent years trying to move forward. Amaya watched her. I built a life for us. I worked. I raised you. I stopped waiting for him. Her voice became softer. But finding this letter, it feels like all those years disappeared. Amaya walked closer. Mom, I am not trying to hurt you. I know. I just need to know the truth. Michelle closed her eyes. The truth. That was the one thing she had avoided. Because sometimes the truth hurts more than a lie. For years, she had imagined many possibilities. Maybe David had another family. Maybe he had fallen in love with someone else. Maybe he was ashamed. But deep down, there was one thought she never allowed herself to consider. What if David had been trying to protect them? That evening, Michelle went through the old storage boxes again. The same boxes she had avoided touching for years. Inside were memories she had buried. Wedding invitations, old birthday cards, baby clothes, photographs, and things that belonged to David. Amaya helped her search. Neither of them knew exactly what they were looking for. A clue, an explanation, anything. Then Amaya found something hidden beneath an old folder. A small black notebook. Mom. Michelle turned around. Her face changed immediately. She recognized it. Where did you find that? It was under these papers. Michelle slowly walked toward her. She reached for the notebook but stopped. For some reason, she was afraid to open it. That was your father's. Amaya looked surprised. Why didn't you ever read it? Michelle looked down. Because after David disappeared, I was angry. She touched the cover. I didn't want anything that belonged to him. But now, after 20 years, she wondered if she had thrown away the only chance to understand him. Michelle slowly opened the notebook. The first few pages contained ordinary things. Cheese. Work notes. Phone numbers. Random thoughts. Then they reached a page that made both of them freeze. A name. Elena Parker. Below the name were several dates, and one sentence written in David's handwriting. If anything happens to me, Elena knows the truth. Amaya looked at her mother. What does that mean? Michelle couldn't answer, because suddenly the mystery became more frightening. David was not simply hiding something. He was preparing for something. Something he believed might happen. They continued reading. The notebook revealed pieces of David's life Michelle never knew about. Before their marriage, David had worked with a company involved in a major financial dispute. He had discovered something wrong, something illegal, something that involved powerful people. But he had not told Michelle because he feared putting her in danger. The more they read, the more confused they became. Because the David described in those pages was not the man Michelle remembered from the end of their marriage. This David was scared. This David was desperate. This David was trying to leave clues. Amaya looked at her mother. "Mom." Michelle wiped tears from her face. "I thought he left us." Her voice broke. "I spent 20 years believing he chose to abandon us." She looked at David's handwriting. "But what if he was taken away from us?" The question hung in the room. And for the first time in 2 decades, Michelle allowed herself to hope. Not because she wanted David back. Too much time had passed. Too much pain had happened. But because every person deserves to know what happened to the person they lost. The next morning, Amaya made a decision. She placed the address from the letter on the table. "We are going there." Michelle looked at her. "Amaya." "No, Mom." Her voice was calm but determined. "You spent 20 years protecting me." She held her mother's hand. "Now let me help you find the truth." Michelle looked at her daughter, and at that moment, she realized something. The little baby she once carried alone had become the woman standing beside her. The woman who was ready to uncover the secret that destroyed their family. They drove across town that afternoon. Neither of them knew what they would find. The address led them to an older neighborhood, a quiet street, a small house. Nothing about it looked important. But Michelle felt something when she stepped out of the car. A feeling she had not felt in years. Fear. Because sometimes the hardest part about finding answers is realizing you may not be ready for them. Amaya knocked on the door. They waited. Seconds passed. Then the door slowly opened. A woman stood there. An older woman with tears already forming in her eyes. She looked at Michelle, then at Amaya, and whispered, "David." Michelle froze. The woman knew his name. Before Michelle could speak, the woman looked at Amaya. Her face changed, like she was seeing someone she had been waiting for. "I knew one day you would come." Michelle's heart stopped. "Who are you?" The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Elena Parker." The name echoed in Michelle Carter's mind. Elena Parker. For 20 years, that name had been hidden from her. 20 years of unanswered questions. 20 years of wondering if her husband had simply abandoned her. But now the woman standing in front of her knew David. "For 20 years, I lived with a story that was never complete. I woke up every morning believing I knew exactly what happened. My husband left. That was the story I told myself. That was the story I told my daughter. That was the story I repeated so many times that eventually, I stopped questioning it. David Carter abandoned us. David Carter chose to walk away. David Carter decided that his wife and unborn child were not enough reason to stay. But after reading his letter, after hearing Elena Parker's story, after seeing the fear in David's own words, I realized something painful. I had spent 20 years being angry at a man who may have been fighting a battle I knew nothing about, and the hardest part was realizing that both things could be true. David could have loved us, and David could have hurt us. He could have been trying to protect us, and he could have still caused us years of pain. Life is complicated. Sometimes people we love make choices that leave scars, even when their intentions are not what we thought. The next morning, Amaya and I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by everything we had discovered. The old letter, the notebook, the photographs, the documents Elena gave us. For the first time in years, I looked at David differently. Not as the man who abandoned me, but as the man who disappeared carrying a secret. Amaya was quiet. I knew she was processing everything. Her entire understanding of her father had changed overnight. For years, she believed she was the daughter of a man who simply did not care enough to stay. But now she had another possibility. A possibility that was both comforting and painful. Because if David loved her, why did he never come home? That question remained. "Mom," Amaya finally said. I looked at her. What if Dad was alive all this time? The question made my heart stop. Because I had asked myself the same thing. I had imagined finding him thousands of times. Sometimes I imagined him walking through the front door. Sometimes I imagined him calling me. Sometimes I imagined looking into his eyes and asking one question. Why? Why did you leave me alone? Why did you let me raise our daughter without you? Why did you let me believe you didn't love us? But now I was afraid of the answer. Because sometimes the truth you spend years searching for is not the truth you are prepared to accept. Elena contacted us 3 days later. She asked us to meet her again. This time, she brought something she had kept hidden. A small box. When she placed it on the table, Michelle immediately recognized it. It was the kind of box David used to keep important documents in. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Elena looked down. "David gave it to me before he disappeared." I felt my chest tighten. "Why didn't you give it to me?" Elena looked ashamed. "Because David made me promise." "Promise what?" She took a deep breath. "Promise that I would only give it to you if the danger was gone." I looked at her. "And you think it is gone now?" She looked toward Amaya. "No." Her answer frightened me. "Then why now?" Elena looked at my daughter. "Because David always believed Amaya would be the one to find the truth." Inside the box were years of hidden information. There were records, names, photographs, and one final message from David. This message was different from the first one. The first letter was about protecting us. This one was about apologizing. "Michelle, I know you may hate me." I stopped reading for a moment, because those words felt like they came directly from him. "I know you may believe I left, because I didn't care. But every day away from you was a punishment I carried." My eyes filled with tears. I wanted to come home. More than anything, I wanted to hold my daughter. I looked at Amaya. She was crying silently, because she was finally hearing what she had waited her entire life to hear. Her father wanted her. The documents revealed that David had spent years gathering evidence against people who had threatened him. He had discovered that someone close to his workplace was involved in a serious scheme. When David refused to participate, he became a target. He thought leaving would protect Michelle and the baby. But what he did not understand was that disappearing also created another kind of pain. A pain that lasted for decades. David had protected our physical safety, but he had damaged our hearts. And that was something he could never undo. Months passed as we continued searching. We contacted people from David's past. We followed old records. We learned more about the life he lived after leaving, and then we found the final piece of the mystery. David had not been hiding because he wanted a new life. He had been living under another name while trying to finish what he started. But during all those years, he kept one thing close. A photograph of Michelle and Amaya. The same photograph from when Amaya was a baby. The photograph I thought he had forgotten. He had carried it all those years. One evening, Elena called me. Her voice sounded different, emotional. "Michelle," I knew immediately. Something had happened. "What is it?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "I found him." My hands started shaking. After 22 years, the answer I had searched for was finally arriving. Not just knew him. She looked like someone who had been carrying a secret for a very long time. Michelle stood frozen. Her eyes moved from Elena to Amaya. Then back to Elena. "How do you know my husband's name?" Elena looked down. A painful silence filled the doorway. I was hoping this day would never come. Amaya stepped forward. "But you knew it would." Elena looked at her carefully. There was sadness in her eyes. "Yes." Michelle's voice became shaky. "Where is David?" The question she had been afraid to ask for 20 years finally left her mouth. Elena did not answer immediately, and that silence was an answer by itself. Michelle felt her heart sink. Elena invited them inside. The house was small, but everything inside looked carefully preserved. Old books, family photographs, a wooden table near the window. But what caught Michelle's attention was a framed picture sitting on a shelf. A picture of David, her David. Michelle walked closer. Her hands trembled. "Why do you have this?" Elena looked at the photograph. "Because he trusted me." Amaya looked confused. "Trusted you with what?" Elena sat down slowly. "With the truth." For years, Michelle believed David had left because he wanted a different life. She believed he had chosen to walk away. But Elena revealed a different story. David had discovered something dangerous at the company where he worked. He found evidence that certain people were secretly moving money through illegal accounts. When David tried to expose what he discovered, he realized he had placed himself in danger. "He wanted to tell you everything," Elena explained. But he was afraid. Michelle shook her head. Afraid of what? Elena looked at her. That the people after him would come after you and your baby. The room became silent. Michelle placed her hand over her mouth. All those years, all those nights she cried, wondering why David abandoned them. And now she was hearing that he might have been trying to protect them. Michelle struggled to accept it. Why didn't he come back? Elena looked down. Because every time he tried, someone was watching. Amaya leaned forward. Are you saying my father was alive? Elena hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. Michelle stood up. Elena? The older woman looked at her. I don't know everything that happened after he disappeared. But I know he loved you. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. No, her voice cracked. If he loved me, he would have found a way. Elena nodded sadly. You have every right to feel that way. Then she reached for a small envelope. But before he vanished, he left something for you. Michelle stared at the envelope. Her name was written on it. Michelle. Her hands shook as she touched it. Because after all these years, David had left her one final message. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter. The paper was old. The ink had faded, but his handwriting was still clear. Michelle, if you are reading this, it means I couldn't come home the way I promised. Michelle immediately began crying. Amaya held her mother's hand. I need you to know one thing. Leaving you was never my choice. Michelle closed her eyes. The words she had waited years to hear. You and our daughter were the best things that ever happened to me. As Michelle continued reading, David explained everything. He wrote about the fear he carried, the people who threatened him, the reason he stayed away. But one sentence made Michelle stop. There is something about Amaya that you need to know. Amaya looked at her mother. What does that mean? Michelle continued reading. Her expression slowly changed. Confusion, shock, fear. Because David's final words revealed that the secret was not only about his disappearance, it was about Amaya. Elena watched them carefully. There is more. Michelle looked up. What? Elena took a deep breath. David believed someone inside your own family knew what was happening. Amaya froze. Someone in our family? Elena nodded. He was trying to protect you from someone close. Michelle felt a chill. Because suddenly the mystery was no longer about a missing husband. It was about betrayal. Someone they trusted. Someone who had been watching their family for years. The truth did not erase the pain. It did not erase the lonely nights. It did not erase the years we spent without him. But it gave us something we never had before. Understanding. For years, I thought my story was about a woman whose husband abandoned her. But it was actually about a family separated by fear, secrets, and choices. It was about a mother who learned how strong she could become. A daughter who refused to stop searching. And a father who spent years trying to fix a mistake he could never fully repair. Today, I no longer tell people that David Carter abandoned me. Because that was only one part of the story. The truth was much bigger. David left. But he never stopped loving us. And I learned something important. Sometimes the truth does not change the past, but it can change the way you carry it. And after 22 years of questions, my daughter finally found the truth. That night, Michelle and Amaya returned home with more questions than answers. But for the first time in 20 years, they had a direction, they had a clue, and they had a reason to keep searching. Michelle placed David's letter beside the old wedding photograph. She looked at the picture of the man she once loved. I thought you abandoned us. A tear rolled down her face. But you were fighting something I didn't even know existed. Across the room, Amaya stared at the documents. She knew one thing. The truth was close. But the truth also had a cost. Because whoever David was protecting them from had spent 20 years hiding the past. And they would not want Michelle and Amaya uncovering it now. I do not know how to describe the feeling of hearing that someone you lost might still be alive. It is not pure happiness. It is not pure sadness. It is everything at once. I had spent years grieving David. I had created a life without him. I had learned how to survive without him. And suddenly, the possibility of seeing him again felt impossible. But there was also anger. Because even if David had reasons, even if he was protecting us, he still left. He missed birthdays. He missed first steps. He missed school performances. He missed the moments that can never be replaced. Time does not wait for explanations. When I finally saw David again, I almost did not recognize him. Years had changed him, but his eyes were the same eyes I remembered from the man I married. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. 22 years of emotions stood between us. Then he whispered, "Michelle." Just my name. But hearing it from him after all those years broke something inside me. I cried. Not because everything was suddenly okay, it wasn't. But because the person I had spent years wondering about was standing in front of me. Alive. Real. David looked at Amaya. And that was the moment that broke my heart the most. Because he was looking at the little girl he once dreamed about. But she was no longer a baby. She was a grown woman. A woman who had searched for him. A woman who had lived her entire life without knowing her father. "I'm sorry," David said. Only 2 words. But they carried years of regret. Amaya cried. She had so many questions, so many emotions, but she asked the one question that mattered most. "Why didn't you come back?" David looked down, and for the first time, I saw him completely broken. Because every time I tried, I thought I was putting you in danger. Amaya shook her head. "But you weren't there." David nodded. "I know. Finding David again did not magically fix everything. That is something people often misunderstand about forgiveness. They think when someone finally explains why they hurt you, the pain immediately disappears. But life does not work that way. A missing piece of information can answer your questions, but it cannot give you back the years you lost. When David stood in front of me after 22 years, I was looking at the man I once loved and the stranger he had become at the same time. I saw the husband who used to make me laugh. The man who held my hand when we found out we were expecting a baby. The father who dreamed about meeting his daughter. But I also saw the empty chair at our dinner table. The birthdays he missed. The nights I cried alone. The moments when Amaya asked questions I could not answer. Both versions of David existed. The man who loved us, and the man who left us. After our first meeting, David did not ask me to forgive him. And honestly, I appreciated that. Because forgiveness is not something someone can demand from you. He understood that he had missed too much. He understood that apologies could not erase 22 years. Instead, he told me something I never expected. "I don't expect you to forget what happened." Those words surprised me. Because for years, I imagined what I would say if I ever saw him again. I imagined shouting. I imagined asking hundreds of questions. I imagined making him feel the same pain I felt. But when the moment came, I realized something. I did not want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted peace. David spent the next few months slowly rebuilding a relationship with Amaya. It was not easy. A daughter cannot simply erase years of absence because she finally meets her father. There were moments when Amaya was angry. There were moments when she avoided his calls. There were moments when she asked difficult questions. And David answered every one of them. He did not make excuses. He did not blame other people. He accepted responsibility. "I should have found another way," he told her. "I should have trusted you and your mother with the truth." That was the part that mattered. Because sometimes the biggest mistake people make is believing their choices only affect themselves. David thought disappearing would protect us. But he did not realize that his absence created another wound. A wound that lasted for years. Watching Amaya interact with David was complicated for me. Part of me was happy, because every child deserves the opportunity to know their parent. But another part of me remembered everything I had gone through. I remembered carrying a baby alone. I remembered sitting in hospital rooms without him. I remembered learning how to fix things around the house because there was nobody else to call. I remembered becoming stronger because I had no choice. And I realized something important. David returning did not take away the strength I built. He did not create the woman I became. I did. One evening, Amaya and I sat together on the porch. The same porch where I had sat many nights when she was a child. Back then, I would watch the street hoping David would appear. Now, years later, everything had changed. "Mom," Amaya said. I looked at her. "Are you happy he's back?" It was a difficult question. I thought about it carefully. "Yes." She looked surprised. "But," I smiled slightly, "but happiness does not mean forgetting." Amaya nodded. "I understand." And I knew she did, because she had experienced her own pain. She had spent her childhood wondering why her father was missing. She had carried questions no child should have to carry. But instead of letting those questions destroy her, she used them to search for answers. That was something I admired about my daughter. Years earlier, I thought my greatest tragedy was losing David. But now I understood something. My greatest achievement was finding myself after losing him. Before David left, I was a wife who believed her future depended on another person staying. After he left, I became a woman who learned she could survive anything. I learned how to stand on my own. I learned how to protect my child. I learned how to rebuild after my world collapsed. And that lesson changed me forever. David eventually asked me a question I never expected. Do you think we could ever be friends? Not husband and wife. Not pretending the past never happened. Just friends. For a moment, I looked at him. The answer was not simple. But life had taught me that not everything needs to return to the way it was. Some things are not meant to be rebuilt. Some things are meant to be understood and accepted. I think we can try, I told him, because after everything, I did not want to carry anger forever. Anger had protected me when I was hurting. But peace was what I wanted for the rest of my life. Looking back now, I realized the truth was never just about where David went. The real story was about what happened to the people left behind. It was about a mother who refused to give up, a daughter who searched for answers, and a family that learned the hardest truth of all. Love alone is not always enough. People can love you and still hurt you. People can have good intentions and still make painful choices. And sometimes, healing does not come from getting the past back. It comes from finally understanding it. Today, when I look at Amaya, I no longer see the child who grew up without her father. I see a strong woman who found answers when everyone else stopped searching. I see the daughter who gave me the courage to face the past. And I see the reminder that even after years of pain, truth has a way of finding its way home. Because my husband did leave me when I was pregnant. That part of the story will always be true. But the full truth was something my daughter discovered years later, and that truth changed everything.